talking film is as little needed as a singing book. Don't worry, that's not coming from it. That's a quote from Viktor Shklovsky. He's some Soviet film critic from the 20s. He's not important though. What's important is that quote. Because for us, it just seems crazy. It seems radical, revolutionary, it seems ridiculous. But back then, it was commonplace. It was actually a very, very normal opinion to have. And that's just because film has changed so much due to the advent of sound that it's almost unrecognizable from what it used to be. And I know most of you guys probably aren't that interested in film history. I kind of get it. But you are interested in your favorite films. So I hope that people like Sophia, Brayton, and Aiden, who's not with us at the moment, will hopefully understand a little bit more why Shutter Island just hits them so hard. Or so people like Claire, Chase, and Ryan will understand why Interstellar just tugs at their heartstrings like I know it did mine. Now, I'm 19 and I'm about to be talking about films made when I was -90. But I've seen over 30 silent films and just under 450 non-silent films from all around the globe. So I think I know a thing or two about movies. Like, films are told both verbally and visually. And in 1927, when Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer, that changed a lot. By the 30s, silent films were completely obsolete, and non-silent films started taking on the form of plays rather than just silent films with sound. And those trends that started then in the 30s have continued until today. So back to my point about visual and verbal storytelling. Right? What does that mean? Well, visual storytelling is basically what the characters do. You look at them do something. Whereas verbal storytelling is about what they say. And in silent films, the average silent film was about 75% visual storytelling because they couldn't have characters speak. Instead, they had intertitles where they would cut to a blank screen with text on it that would say what the characters were saying. And the worst silent film, the average silent film, had about 100 to 150 intertitles in their 2-hour runtime.
Wow.
The good ones, though, had as little as possible. F.W. Murnau, the greatest German film director at the time, he had a film called Der letzte Mann. You can see in your little pamphlet. It had a single title card. And the only reason he had one is because the studio forced him to. Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton in America, they were the best two silent filmmakers in America, the kings of comedy at the time. They had a competition between each other, a friendly competition, to see who could make a film with the least amount of title cards. Charlie Chaplin won with 23, Buster Keaton lost with 25. Now, the thing is, the reason why these filmmakers wanted so badly to eliminate verbal storytelling is because visual storytelling is so much more powerful. Take, for example, La La Land. Sophia and Annie, both of you guys said that was one of your favorite movies. Annie, your favorite scene from La La Land was the planetarium scene, right? Do you know how much dialogue is in that scene?
0.
None at all. Do you know how long it is?
2 minutes.
4 minutes. 4 minutes and not a single word spoken, and it's your favorite scene in the movie. Sophia, your favorite scene was the ending. Do you know how much dialogue is in it?
Gonna guess none.
10 words that are barely muttered, and that scene is 9 minutes long. And like I said, it is your favorite scene of the movie. And all your other responses in the surveys, for the most part, fit a similar cue. Like, Jeho, you said, Love Actually, she's silently crying was your favorite scene. Couldn't be more obvious. The black hole scene in Interstellar, we aren't crying because Matthew McConaughey is talking about how much he misses his daughter. We're crying because he can see her through the bookshelf, and he's staring at the daughter he left behind, and he can't talk to her. Now, like I said, all this changed in 1927 because Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer. It wasn't the first film with synchronous sound, which is where the video and the audio played at the same time, but it was the first film where people spoke. It was the first talking, which I will use that word, even though it's so dated. Other films have been released where they just use synchronous sound technology to sync the soundtrack with the visuals, but for The Jazz Singer, Al Jolson, the star of it, he had several musical numbers, but between two of them, he improvised a single line of dialogue. And he said, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing. And those were the first words spoken on film. It blew audiences away. Seeing Al Jolson, one of their favorite jazz singing stars, sing on film was one thing, but seeing him speak was a whole another. The Jazz Singer was the spark that lit the flame of synchronous sound films. And that flame spread quickly. By 1930, it was 1927, 1930, silent films completely obsolete. if you look at, 1927, one talkie was released, The Jazz Singer. 1928, 60 talkies were released.
Wow.
By 1929, pretty much no silent films existed. As a matter of fact, for all of the 30s, the only both critically and financially successful silent film was Charlie Chaplin's City Lights in 1931. So by 1932, Americans were done with silent films completely. There was a similar pattern abroad. In other countries, filmmakers like Carl-Theodor von Trier, Fritz Lang, Hiroshi Shimizu, they completely abandoned silent films and started making sound films. They still had title cards, but they never used them for dialogue. They just had the characters speak, now that they're able to. Fritz Lang, for example, he went from making 2.5-hour German sci-fi epics, actually some of them were 4.5 hours, they were really long movies, to making hour-and-a-half long crime thrillers the second he had his hands on sound equipment. There was a big change. But as big as that change was, in America, the change was even bigger. All of a sudden, movies started becoming like plays instead of their own things. Let's take a look at the acting. No longer did actors like Charlie Chaplin, Harry Langdon, Harold Lloyd, and Buster Keaton rule the scene. They were all physical comedians. They didn't need their voices. And as Jeff knows, speech is very powerful. So the actors that did come to power, like Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, John Wayne, which I'm sure some of you at least know a few of those names, they were huge. That's all people wanted to see because they had immense command of their voice, their delivery. It was all voice. And a business professor at Clemson actually studied the employment rates of silent actors during the sound era, and by looking at all the numbers, he determined that the reason so many of them dropped out of the industry was because, simply put, there are different skills required for silent movies and sound movies. That's not me talking, that's the numbers. Now, besides acting, the writing and directing for these films also significantly changed. For one, silent film writers, they had no experience with dialogue, but playwrights had been doing this their whole lives. Plays have been around forever. So the studios started firing off the silent writers and hiring on playwrights. So these playwrights would write very dialogue-heavy movies. All of a sudden, the point became less what the actors are doing and more what they're saying. So along with that, the directors started being better at showing that. So now the directors in the 30s, like Howard Hawks, Frank Capra, Ernst Lubitsch, they all had a style much like a play where the camera is perfectly steady and the actors move left and right horizontally across the screen, as though the camera's the audience and the actors are on the stage. Don't get me wrong, they were good at it. Their films are fantastic, but it's a very different style. And how that style has impacted cinema continues to this day. I mean, silent movies aren't even around anymore. There is one coming out this Christmas, but that's one in the past how many decades? I mean, and also if you turn on a movie and you put it on mute, you won't understand a thing that's going on. Dialogue has become an integral part of film. And also, films become somewhat lazy with how it uses dialogue, with the presence of the over-the-shoulder shot, reverse shot. How many movies use two people, and you guys know this as well as I do, on the survey I asked you how many movies are there scenes where two people just stand there and just talk, and that's kind of it? 62% of the film's runtime was the average response from you guys, which I think that is a lot of time to be spent on those scenes. But I don't want to blame this invention of sound for it solely. I'm just pointing out that there was a pattern, because those shot, reverse shot, over the shoulder shots, that's like the next step in the play-like framing of the 30s, where instead of the camera being in the audience, it's now on the stage with the actors. But I also don't want to make it sound like synchronous sound is inherently a bad thing. I just want to make the point that it changed cinema very deeply. I mean, the balance between visual and verbal storytelling has shifted significantly. Ever since after The Jazz Singer, within 3 years, silent films were completely out the window. And after that, films started becoming more and more like plays, and those trends have continued in modern day. So what I'll leave you guys off with is this. Sometimes it's a lot better to have a character say exactly what they're doing or say exactly what's happening. But other times, you can get it off with a simple gesture.